Hi, my name is Stephen Kirsting, and once again it is time for the monthly theme critique video. And for March theme 11, the assignment was using long focal lengths to create background separation. And I wanted to discuss a little bit about what happens and why it works so well. And I drew this diagram to help explain that. If we start with the 50 millimeter scenario from 10 foot away from our subject and 40 foot away from the background, we have 50 foot total to the background, 10 foot to the subject. And we have this wider field of view. It's about 45 degrees for a 50 millimeter lens. So we include our subject and more of the background. So we choose to provide more background separation by using a longer focal length. In this scenario, we switch to a 100 millimeter lens. Now, a 100 millimeter lens has twice the magnification of a 50 millimeter lens and half the field of view. So we back off to 20 feet from our subject, doubling the distance, which keeps our subject the same size within our composition. But we include less of the background due to the narrower field of view, and we have not doubled the distance to our background. In fact, we've only added 10 feet to it. So we have not negated the 2 times magnification the 100 millimeter has for the background as we did for the subject. At the subject, we went from 10 feet to 20 feet, doubling the distance, so there's no change in magnification of the subject. But we went from 50 feet to 60 feet, and that's only 10 foot. It's not twice, it's not 100 feet. So we have a greater magnification of the background. So we include less of it in the field of view, and it is larger. And larger makes it more out of focus. Just as if you took an image on the screen here and zoom it in, the larger I make this, the less in focus it seems to be. And the smaller I make it, the sharper it seems to be. That is what depth of field actually is. The size of an out of focus point determines how out of focus it appears based on our viewing distance. So the longer lens includes less background, enlarges the background, and makes it more out of focus. And that's why using long focal lengths really works to provide that separation that was the goal for this. All right. So I'm going to start at the beginning. I'm going to start with Adrian's image. And we have an image taken at 300 millimeter. It's a zoom lens, f5.6, which is probably wide open for this lens and not its sharpest. We're at 1/320th of a second, which is marginal for a 300 millimeter handheld, and ISO 2000 in order to get there. So, 1/320th is if these grass seed pods, whatever they are blowing in the wind, that's going to be marginally slow, and it's slow for hand holding long focal lengths. Greater magnification requires higher shutter speeds, and the rule of thumb, of 1 over focal length starts to fail somewhere around 200 millimeters for most people. All right, and then the really high ISO. So we can expect this image not terribly sharp, and it's not. A lot of noise there is, and it looks to be worse due to processing, probably in an attempt to increase sharpness. And in this image, it didn't help, so I don't know that I would have bothered. Looking at this image compositionally, I see really nice colors, really nice blurring of the background, so I like all of that. The lack of sharpness is a problem, so it becomes more of an aesthetic image than a detail type image, and that's okay. And the background goes a little bit abstract, so that works. I think I would have composed it so that this seed pod is the focus, because it seems to be the focus. It's kind of framed, it's kind of alone. So you got these lines, all these lines kind of leading to it, and then it's kind of framed. So to me, this is the point of focus, but it's too close to the edge, and it's a bit monotone up here. So compositionally, I would like it a little further to the bottom. And if we go to a crop overlay, I would want this intersection right around here, and I would want some more space at the top. That's how I would want the composition, either in camera or post cropping. And I tend to always leave myself some extra room for refining the composition in post, unless it's a really controlled shot. I don't try to get it 100% in camera. I always leave myself some room to fix a few of these things. You know, we could kill the noise, knock a bunch of the noise out of this, even knock the detail down. It doesn't really hurt the image if we go to the way it was, to the lack of sharpness. You know, in my mind, this is going to print better, it's going to display better, and it's still an aesthetic image. It's not, you know, we're not going to get detail that's not there. So I would not have tried to push it as far to get the sharpness back in the first place, or I would knock it back in post like this. We can do a gradient. We can do an exposure gradient here, kind of bring up that area, balance out the colors a little bit. Let's get rid of that color though. So we can balance out the exposure a little bit so it's not as monotone up there, dark on dark. That helps a bit. And if we wanted to, we could probably add a little bit of a vignette to tone down the bottom portion at least. We could do it with a brush, or I'm just going to add a bit of a vignette here. Let's increase the feather. It's going to knock the bottom down a bit, maybe with a brush. I don't know why that color is remaining. We take a large brush and we just knock that down with a low flow. Tone that down just a bit. Trying to get a little more attention up here. And we could mess around with this all we want, but you know, we're not going to make this a great image just due to the lack of sharpness and the amount of noise we started with. But overall, you could have stopped down for more sharpness. Of course, the penalty there is higher ISO or slower shutter speed, and that may not have been feasible or reasonable in this situation. All right, let's look at our next image. This one is by Knitton. I forget what this bird is called, but excellent picture. Sharp, nice, pretty much nice composition. Twig, take what you get, you know. Let's see if we're zoomed in 100%. We are. All right, it looks pretty sharp to me, quite sharp. Settings wise, it's a 300 millimeter at f9, so it's stopped down. It's just, again, it's a zoom lens, f5.6 at max, so it's stopped down a little over a stop for bringing back some sharpness. Shutter speed is 1/320th, perhaps on the slow side for hand holding, but this could have been on a tripod or handheld. It worked. And ISO 100, so the ISO is low and we don't see a lot of noise in the background or anything like that. The use of the long focal length has definitely caused the background to blur out, and we have great background separation. The only thing you could do in this scenario, I think, you know, background choice, but birds don't cooperate that often. Looking at the image, the bird itself, I want to see more of the eye. So I would come in here, actually we'll take a brush and we will bring up the shadows quite a bit. Let's take a look at how this works. Make sure we got auto mask on. Paint that area and down through here. Bring those shadows up and maybe even bring the exposure up a bit. And that's going to bring that eye out quite a lot. Let's see where we were. So there to there. And I might even do a little bit on the global side. Bring shadows up a bit. And bring highlights down. Actually, bring whites down. Watching our histogram, make sure we don't get clipping anywhere and stuff. So that has increased the blues in this area here, brought out the cheek, brought out the eye. So we have a little more connection, eye connection with the bird. I think that's worked well. We could do some sharpening. It's probably been sharpened, but we could increase that quite a bit, but take most of it out, especially out of the background. We don't want to make this thing crunchy, but you can see that the feathers and eye just a bit sharper now after sharpening. And the last thing I think with this image is I would have composed this with a vertical composition. The bird's vertical, the twigs are vertical, a vertical composition, and more room along the top, I think. I don't know if we're following any kind of rules as far as composition goes, but I don't care. I like the spacing overall. You know, it's not on the right 1/3. I don't care. It's not center. I don't care if it is or isn't. I like it as it is, but I would go with probably vertical and more space, particularly across the top, and maybe some more at the bottom, so this portion's not quite chopped off. And that's one thing with wildlife and birds. Most images are taken landscape, so switch it up, go to a portrait orientation in your composition and go for something a little different. And I think with the vertical lines of the bird and the branches and stuff, that would have worked well for this image. Nice image. Okay, here we have an image by Stan. We've got 120 millimeter at 1/8,000th of a second, ISO 800 f4. Alright, so 1/8,000th of a second. No idea why it had to be 1/8,000th at f4 and ISO 800. ISO certainly could have been lower, and with a lower shutter speed, you know, it could have been at 200 with 1/2000th of a shutter speed would still be more than enough. It could have been at f8, you know, and at 1/500th of a shutter speed, probably enough, and that would have helped with sharpness, because f4, I don't know what the lens is specifically, but this is not as sharp as it could be in details. We could bring some of that up, bring out the trees a little bit. We're getting some noise in the background, and we can get rid of a lot of that with masking. Maybe something in that range. I'm not sure what the subject is here. Is it the branch or is it the drops? To me, it's the water drops on the branch, but the drops itself is the primary, and the reflections they're catching. So I want them sharper, and I want to eliminate some of this competing stuff here. So I would compose this differently. I would bring it in, something, maybe something around there. Maybe something like that. And eliminate some of the distractions and put more emphasis on the water drops. If we wanted the branch to compete more, we could see, we can up our contrast here. I think that would help. And we'll bring up the shadows just so it comes out a little bit. And I'd be somewhere in there, you know. Maybe the composition's still a little wonky. But I would play with it and look at putting the emphasis on these water drops. And you'll notice that when I had the crop there, it's about on the 1/3 line. I only really did that because I didn't want to crop off this leading line coming from the upper side, and I didn't want it too low in the frame or it was at the bottom edge. Yeah, I would be somewhere around there on this image, and I like it. I think it should be sharper, and with what appears the amount of background separation you do have, I think you could have stopped down for greater sharpness and even a little more depth of field at the subject, because remember, the background is so far away that it is much more out of focus. So you can have greater depth of field but with a longer focal length and still have that same amount of blur in the background that you would get with a shorter lens. So the point, it's a trade-off, but when you go to a longer lens, especially if it's a zoom lens and you're working at one of the extreme ends where they tend not to be as sharp, consider stopping down for increased sharpness, and it would be a slight trade-off at the background, assuming you have good background distance. All right. Our next image is by Adrian again, and here we have a 300 millimeter at 6.3, so stop down ever so slightly for sharpness, and an ISO of 1250, so a bit lower, so we can expect a little better noise characteristics, and 1/500th of a second, which is a better shutter speed across the board. Perhaps a little slow yet for a moving subject or flag waving in the wind, and we see a little bit of blur in the flag, and it looks like maybe a bit on him as well. That might actually be lack of focus. There's still quite a bit of noise here, and it's really hard to say because nothing is entirely tack sharp, and I'd like to see it sharper. So we can look at it smaller. That makes it sharper. We can print it smaller, display it smaller, or view it from a longer distance. That all makes it look sharper. But I think stopping down, f8 is probably where that lens is starting to do its best. F8 to 11. That's pretty typical of super zoom type lenses. And unfortunately, that would cause the ISO to be higher or the shutter speed to be lower. It would have been about 1/300th, 1/320th again. Maybe fast enough for him, a little more flag blur. It's a tough call. All right. As far as background separation of the long lens, the background is not busy. The only thing this portion right here is a bit busy to me, so I would probably clone and mask that out. I don't think Lightroom's the right place to do it. I don't think it'll do that good a job. I'm not exactly certain what that is, but it's a bit busy and it's a bit bright. It stands out even more than the white does, drawing a bit of attention outside of where we want it. Otherwise, I like the composition. I don't mind the cropped hat. I don't mind the cut into the flag. Puts a lot of emphasis on his face. I wish it was sharper, and I would just get rid of this area right here in order to make that background, that little spot in the background, less distracting. It just draws a little bit too much attention. Overall, pretty nice image of a parade scene. It definitely conveys what's going on, puts the emphasis on the individual, and has done well with separating them from the background, which was the goal. Alright, we have an image by Melissa, and great background separation. Background's blurred pretty much to nothing. And we're looking at 200 millimeter. Again, it's wide open, so it's not going to be as sharp. ISO is reasonably low. Shutter speed's good high. So, like I said, around 200 millimeter, you start doubling up that shutter speed. And so we could expect this to be reasonably sharp, except for lack of depth of field and the aperture being wide open. We'll see just how sharp it is. It's pretty sharp. Got a bit of noise going on in some places down there. It looks like not entirely certain why. On the edges, looks like maybe sharpening was applied a bit heavy. A little bit of fringing there. That stripe is going along the edge there. Again, stopping down would increase the depth of field here. So if we double the aperture, we went to f11. What we have here as far as depth of field is, I don't know, ½ inch, quarter inch. It would double. It'd go to an inch, a ½ inch or an inch. And that would help with the fringing and the sharpness overall. So don't be afraid to stop that down in order to increase depth of field at the subject, because remember, your background's much further away and it's not going to have as much impact on it. An extra inch of depth of field at the subject is not going to have much impact on the background if it's a good long distance away and being blurred by a long focal length. So I think that would have been what I would do with this image. I'm struggling a little bit as to where to focus overall, and I think it would have helped if this area was in focus, the stems were in focus. Because I've got petals, leaves here, I've got petals here, and then it kind of steps to blur in between, and more of the subject it fades out. So I would have stopped down, and I think it probably would not have impacted the background significantly. It was something to look at, but overall, nice image. A little tight on the crop on the bottom, I think, for me. I would like to see these leaves kind of going up this way, maybe a vertical composition, a portrait type composition, because the lines are kind of going up. That might have worked better, I don't know. Overall, I like this image. And then this next image is pretty much the same story. We've got a little tighter composition, which means we've moved a little closer, a little less depth of field, and that makes it seem a bit busier to me. And one thing that's interesting in this image, 1/400 f5.6, 200 ISO, still at 200 millimeters. There's no difference in the settings. So what's the difference in the image? Background selection. We've changed the angle a bit and included less background. The background we've included is darker, and I can't tell. I don't think flash was used in these images, but this one kind of looks like flash was used because the background dropped so hard. May not have been, but we're just at a different angle, including a darker background. And as I've said throughout all of these assignments, nothing matters as much as the background selection. In this case, for me, the contrast is a bit stark. I prefer the first image. It's a little more pleasing in my mind as far as overall tonality. This image is a little stark. It feels like a flash image where the background is dropped hard, and it becomes more of a study than an emotional image. And I prefer the first. But it did accomplish what we wanted. Alright, this image was not actually tagged for critique. It's by Hayward. It's a 58 millimeter lens, ISO 320, f2.8, 1/25th of a shutter speed. tripod. I just wanted to include this because a lot of stuff was done right here. Tripod was used, composition is nice, the distance to the background was controlled with intention. What I mean by that is there's enough background blur that it fades out and does not, the focus of this is obviously the earbuds, the headphone thing, and that is right where your attention goes. The background's enough there that it puts it in context. You kind of say, hey, that's a radio. Goes with the earbuds. I see the knobs. I see the head. I see the screen on it. Looks like maybe a DVD slot. I don't know, a CD slot. So the background's there with intention and purpose. It helps tell the story. It's out of focus enough that it's not distracting away from the subject, and it's in focus enough to be supporting the subject. So I thought everything about this was done really quite well, and I just wanted to include it for that reason. Is more along the lines of the previous assignment, controlling distances. Technical, this area I might work on dodging that down, that catch light there, that one there, just a little bit too bright, drawing a bit too much attention. But overall, a lot was done well with this image. And I just wanted to include it. Alright, we have an image by Karen. And I forget what this guy's name is. Anyways, we've got 200mm at f4. So again, wide open. Really, when you go to the longer focal lengths, take advantage of it. Stop down for sharpness. That's part of the reason of going to a longer focal length. Yes, you're negating a little bit of that additional background blur, but not near as much as you've gained. So when you go to the longer focal lengths, use that to help you and allow you to stop down for better sharpness. All right, so with this lens, it's an f4L, so it should be pretty sharp, wide open, and shutter speed's definitely high enough. ISO's low. So I probably would have been right around 5.6 and 1/1000th shutter speed, and I don't think it would have had that big an impact on the background. I think it would have helped with sharpness on the subject, even if this is a slight case of misfocus. Maybe it's focused back here on these Amazon letters more than it is here. Well, if we had more depth of field at the subject, they would both be in focus, and that's what I would look for, I think. So take advantage of it, stop down, use it to benefit you the most that you can. All right. Otherwise, I like the wide aspect on this one. I like the composition. I think we could mess around with it, try to increase the sharpness and clarity and things like that. Clarity affects the background quite a bit. You'll see that affected the background quite a bit. So you might want to do it selectively with a brush. You could play with sharpness, but really just getting it a little better in camera. And that's the other thing, when you're working with terribly shallow depths of field, a little more is usually beneficial. And focal length has twice the effect on depth of field that aperture does, but it's a trade-off with distance. Point is, if you're staying in the same place, same distance, and you go to a longer focal length, your depth of field drops off real fast. So just keep saying the same thing, but stop down. That seems to be the biggest thing everyone's doing with this, is staying with a wide aperture and not stopping down, taking benefit of some of that reduced depth of field for the background, reduced sharpness in the background. Right, here we have an image by M, and This image is at 260 millimeters, not quite at the end of the zoom range. It's stopped down, so it's not wide open, so it should be sharp, and it does look to be pretty sharp, but again, the depth of field is very shallow because we're working at short distances with long focal lengths. And ISO is relatively low, not a lot of noise in this. There's some we could get rid of in the background there, and we want 12/50th of a second, so maybe, I don't know if a lower no, I don't think a lower ISO is an option in this camera. Biggest thing here I think is background selection. There's not really any separation in distance, so you're gonna have a very hard time providing separation if there is no physical separation. If there's no distance, it's really hard to throw it out of focus unless there's absolutely no depth of field. And if there's no depth of field, subject generally suffers for sharpness, and I think that's the case here. I would want it a little closer. This makes the point of focus in this image makes the water droplets in these back petals the subject, the area of focus, and that makes this a bit distracting to me. So I'd want it moved forward, I think, or just increased overall. And of course, with this little background separation, increasing the depth of field by stopping down even further would cause a more significant impact on the background because it's just too close. However, this image is also by M. We have the lens is wide open this time, so it's not going to be as sharp, and the shutter speed is lower, 1/250th. That's pushing it, and it's wide open. So, you know, in this case, I think a higher ISO might have been in line. It looks pretty awful sharp. I don't know if sharpening was added. We could increase it, but that's going to increase noise. Let's bring this up around there and then mask most of that out. We're going to reduce the radius on this. Mask more of that out. Get it. We're not making big gains. Just a slight increase. Again, if it was possible to bring some detail out of the eye, I would look to do that. Get a little more of an eye and less of just a dark spot. Might want to do that selectively because it's had an impact on the background. But I don't think that back has been negative. And here we definitely could have stopped down for greater sharpness. Again, the ISO trade-off, ISO shutter speed trade-off has to be considered, but depending, I would want more sharpness if I could handle the noise and deal with the noise in post. You know, be able to get rid of quite a bit of that noise in the background quite easily with just some luminance reduction. And it doesn't have that big an impact on sharpness. So I would be somewhere in there. And I think you probably could have taken ISO 400 at f8. In fact, with my cameras, I'm seldom below f8 for these types of images. Almost always f8 or higher. Alright, and our last image is by Ian, and again we're to that critical background selection. We've got pretty busy background. We got 300 millimeter at f5.6, so probably wide open, 1/800, plenty of shutter speed, and ISO 800. Depending upon the camera, ISO 800 could be pushing it. We got a lot of color noise back here, so we could get rid of a lot of that. leaves us with luminance noise. Get rid of some of that, but we're not going to get rid of the busyness in the background itself. You got a lot of specular highlights, so we're getting a lot of bokeh characteristics, and they don't look bad. You know, they're pretty uniform, they're pretty smooth. F5.6, they would be smoother and more uniform, stop down a little bit, but they'll still be busy. All right. The other thing is kind of on the shadow side here, so we're balancing what appears to be blown out skin in this area, and trying to get a decent exposure here. So as far as that goes, we could try to go and bring up shadows, bring up maybe we could reduce contrast a little bit. If we went with clarity, it's gonna make the background a little busier. Might do that selectively with a brush on the bird. Let's reset all those, and we'll bring clarity to the top and just brush that in here. Oh, the flow I have set so low, so we do that. Now you're probably thinking that my brush is going all over the place, so it's going to affect everything, but it's not. Only where because I have masking set on, auto masking, only what the crosshairs touch gets selected. Similar stuff to what the crosshairs have gone over is what's being selected. Alright, and there's probably no recovering that blown out head. We could try highlights, but actually, if you look at highlights up on the histogram, this area, it's not the brightest area. Whites is the brightest area. So we could bring whites down a bit. That's going to feel more like an exposure adjustment. About the only other thing we could do here might be to add some color artificially. So we can take all of this, we can select a color, and we'll pick something off the bird itself in that area. Say OK, and brush that in. So we can replace some of that pure white with some color. And we can knock down the exposure a little bit to make it a little more obvious that there's some color there. So while we haven't regained any detail or anything, we've replaced some of that harsh white with a more cohesive color. Alright, all in all, for me, I think the background selection, that is one of the tough things with wildlife. Sometimes you have to pick the background and wait for the animals to move into that area. You know, if you're just taking what you get what you get. And it's not usually ideal. Sharpness, not as sharp as I'd like. Again, wide open. The other thing that might have been possible here would be to have gotten even lower. Because if you can get really low, this portion that's up here becomes down here. It's much further behind, and it is more out of focus than this stuff is. So if you could have got a different angle on the bird so that the higher background became the background behind the bird, I think that would have helped the image as well. It's one of the things that makes wildlife photography so tough, is they just do not cooperate, and a lot of times you just don't get what you want. Alright, that's it for this month's video critique. Until next time, when I see you again, have a great day.